You?
Hello.
How are you?
What's I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, you look good. You look
How are
good.
you doing?
This is the other shirt.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yep. Has all
Yeah,
the
I'm not
value.
wearing mine today because it's a little chilly here.
Yeah, it's chilly here too. Even though it's warmer than way warmer than it's supposed to be, it's still chilly. So yeah.
Oh, we had a nice thunderstorm last night.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't rain wonderful?
Well, we actually get a fair amount of it here.
Good.
Uh, up to 50, 60 inches a year.
Oh, wow. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, it surprised me. If I remember correctly, it's even wetter than it was in Oregon
Wow.
back in the Willamette Valley, back in the when I was there years ago. But that was the Willamette Valley. Up in the Coast Range, it was 100 inches. Just
Yeah, I remember Berkeley in California, the hills there are mostly fog,
yeah,
and but they get a lot of fog, and so that's what's kept the redwoods alive, is
yeah,
the fog. They don't really need rain; they need lots of fog. So
that is so.
yeah, I was just on a really wonderful call. It just gave me incredible hope. It's a food summit from GRC, which is the Global Resource Coalition, I think, a global regenerative coalition. They're a group of folks, all volunteers, and they just do stuff. So I'm in a number of calls that they give, but this is the first really event they've done. They do these talks. We've been in discussions on governance and economics for a year or more, and ag they have, and one on education. So those are ongoing things, but this is the first summit kind of thing where they pull together resources. And so today there were three people, and I only got to hear two, but the first one was on hydroponics. The second was Joshua Hughes, a guy in Puerto Rico, um, who is doing a permaculture cooperative with his folks. And so he's really got the whole thing down. He is thinking short and long term, has been developing it for 12 years. So it's not just growing food, it's growing food and then making products, and then growing all the food that you need for those products, and then thinking about long-term things. So he's growing short-term trees, special trees that are used in the music industry for guitars and that sort of thing. They have
Mhm.
a life of about 25, 30 years, and then longer term trees, which is the return of the forest. So he's got all these levels of things that he is doing, and he's doing the same thing financially. So they're growing stuff to sell, they're growing products to sell for that stuff. And then he's trying to get investors to invest in a way that allows them to do the experimenting that they need to do. And the whole thing is owned by everybody, so that it's not easy to sell. So that somebody can't just come in and buy the forest, because it's like 120 people or more own it. So it's more trust. So the
Yeah.
forest is really held in trust. He's just very clever. And then there was another guy from Africa who's in a refugee camp, and he's doing permaculture also, and has added mushrooms. So, and they use the mushrooms for all sorts of things. So he's also, they're growing things, they're making products. They have a mushroom porridge that they do with soybeans and sorghum and a couple of other grains. Um, and then they do biochar, and the biochar allows them to not only plant, but also cook. And so they don't have to cut down trees for food or for wood. and the women don't have to go into the woods and risk getting killed and raped. So it's just a beautiful, I mean, they're really thinking holistically and in cycles so that things all come together. It was just wonderful to hear, just wonderful to hear the things they're doing. And he's the guy in Africa is also getting it into schools and universities. So they're starting to teach this and practice it at that level so that people really do have those skills when they go back home. So all of that from a refugee camp.
Yeah, I saw something on YouTube yesterday. I think it was in Senegal. I forget. That may not be the exact nation. One in the transition zone between the Sahara and the forests.
The Sahel.
And this man wasn't mentioned. It may be the same one, but it wasn't mentioned that he was in a. I mean, he was in a village. It was not a. So it could very well be a different person. But he started using the traditional methods of planting, which have to do with. I didn't recall the whole thing, but making a grid where you dig, carve out like a crescent, and you put in certain, manure, seeds, the seeds you want to plant, and so forth. But you do it all around. And the crescent is because there's just a slight slope. The whole point is that whatever rain there is, what you've done is you've created like a catchment for each little plant, plant grouping. And so at first, it absolutely depends on that extra water, so that it doesn't just dry out and die. But they showed that's sort of the before picture, doing a new area. The after picture shows a lot growing around, there's just a whole, you set up a whole new environment.
Yeah. They're getting.
And I haven't expressed the details all that clearly, but evidently it was, he was reverting to something that had been taught in earlier generations, but not hardly anyone's using it anymore.
Yeah,
it works.
Yeah.
In fact, they even showed there's a machine, sort of like a Troy built, cultivator, about that size, but it does exactly very quickly and simply, the carved out thing, so you don't have to be shoveling all day.
Nice.
So they can really cover some ground.
Right.
The point is that some of these are important food crops, and some are just to get things growing.
Yeah.
And to it's a whole process for reclaiming.
Right.
The arable land.
Yeah, the Sahel is one of the more important areas of Africa, very similar to the Amazon, in terms of the flowing rivers that carry water around the planet. And its drying makes a huge difference in other parts of the world. So replanting that is really huge. Yeah.
And this was actually, it was funny, it wasn't about him per se. I mean, this particular video was, but the title was a series, and the series was entitled "Things You Don't Know About the Sahara." So it's a much larger picture.
Right. Nice.
The wowie zowie little details. No, it was saying, here are the people who live there. It's very well done.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, we had a speaker Tuesday, Daniel Melo Matos, who is currently in Portugal. And he was talking about his project. Well, we started out talking about regenerating soil and how that works, but he has a vision and a project called climate design to, at scale, plant enough to make a difference. And he has ideas for how to do all that. It was really quite fun listening to him. So that's in the inspiring interviews section. But
Well,
yeah.
this morning, I mean, I wrote a friend of mine, I said, the word for the day is remembering. And then down below, I said, yeah, the word for today is remembering, but I prefer to spell it RE-membering. And yeah, I was thinking about this a lot last night. And two of the thoughts that came to mind was one, this is how the neurons work. We actually remember, adjacent the proper neurons that create the memory, oftentimes inaccurately, so that that's why memories are famously inaccurate, but it doesn't matter, they're fun. But the other one, I really got into thinking about how I was taught. And in biology, in middle school, actually, it wasn't each person, but we coupled up with someone and we were given a fetal pig.
Yeah.
Dissected.
Right.
And it's like, I just said that, I commented, it's very weird to be, fussing around with the dead thing in order to learn about life. But that's the way we were taught.
That's right. And no context, no understanding of how that thing lived in its environment and how it was designed to do that.
Wow, right. And without how it lived, how it felt, how it experienced wonders. I mean, once I was at the Mexico City Zoo, and I happened upon a fawn being born, or whatever they call the baby of that type of deer. It was being born, and I was there with some street kid who picked me up and was showing me around. So I bought him some food and so forth. Well, we stood there transfixed for about at least 15, maybe 20, 25 minutes. And if anyone ever tells you that animals don't have incredibly vivid emotional experiences, they haven't watched this process as this young creature, this newborn creature, discovered what it was to be alive. And it kept going up to things. It just, first it was just sort of dealing with its legs, but that didn't take all that long. And then it started going up to things, and it would go up and sniff at other animals. And it was, and we weren't the only two. There were perhaps 100 people who were just standing there totally enraptured.
Right.
And it puts to shame any kind of dismemberment of living things in order to try to understand what's going on. So what I'm hearing is, the common element in what you've been describing and what I described is that people are taking into account that life is messy and full of contradictions and contrasts, but it all goes together.
Right. Yeah, and it can be planned.
If you try to separate it out, you're in trouble.
Yeah, well, yeah, because that's what we've done. But putting it all together really makes it much more robust. And yeah, Joshua was just really amazing to hear his thoughts and how deep his thinking has gone into making all of that there and possible and growing and to have legs. And to see that was one of the things that also crossed my mind. The thing about the indigenous world is that it's very separated. It is about people living in a place for a very long time and managing that place, but that's where they are. They're really not connected very strongly to other. There may be trading kinds of things, but not even all that much. I mean, in the Andes and in the Southwest, there was trading, but it was within that circle pretty much. And you did get some trade from long away, but you didn't have connections to the people. You got stuff that was passed through different tribes. And the thing I got from Joshua is he's really thinking globally. He's really seeing that for those people to exist, they need to have those connections. They need to have income from other areas coming into them in order to allow them to grow and to deepen what they're doing, because there's not enough capital right there to actually make that happen. So they do need outside infusion. And he's planning for that in a way that keeps the whole intact.
And
So
what
it's
I'm
not
hearing
extractive.
is that income doesn't necessarily have to be money. It could be income,
Right.
but elements that are absolutely essential to carrying on that agricultural process or whatever process that they're interested in.
Well, and there is some capital too that's needed. He's really thinking about investment and how to do that differently so that it's not extractive. So he's very, very conscious of how those things can be done in a way that is self-feeding for everything. Everything there's a value added that flows through the chain to everybody, as opposed to an extractive thing where it goes in one direction. So that was just really wonderful to
Is
hear.
Joshua indigenous in a?
No, he's not. He moved there, I think 12, 15 years ago, but I mean, he's there, and he's made sure that everything he's done has been with the people who live there. So they co-own, they all work, it is a cooperative with everybody. So he's not the person in charge and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of where I was thinking, because he does bring that broader view, because he is from outside and because he is westernized to some extent. But so it gives them actually more capacity than they would have had just staying within their own circle. Yeah.
That's a tough thing to do. It's a tough sell. We have a little community here, 13 townhomes, and back when I first arrived there 15 years ago, there were many original owners, had owned for 15 years or even more, 20 years. And we worked on a basis of the commons, a commonly held property. And I could still do this work. And there were young men, other men, and all of them younger than I am. And so we did everything. And, we changed the face of it. We rebuilt the whole, at least what you see along the street. We rebuilt it for penny, or let's say dimes on the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all, volunteered labor. We had a common garden that was more productive than it is now. We did all the yard work and then saved all of the refuse from it, in order to have that usable as compost. And what I found was, many people moved away for various reasons. The newcomers just are not willing. It's inconvenient. They can't be bothered to do that.
Right.
And it's just incredible what used to run fairly smoothly, for literally dimes on the dollar. So our HOA fee, instead of being 220, was 70. for years and covered everything. There's just such a resistance.
Yeah.
And here's the flip side of that. The new folks who don't have a hand in it complain the most.
They don't understand.
They
Yeah.
don't have any understanding of what it's like to live and work together.
Yeah.
They don't understand the commons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's sad. I mean, I feel
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. 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 Well, maybe it'll come around again out of necessity. Who knows?
Oh,
I
I'm
mean,
sure it will.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we used to do all of our plumbing ourselves. Now it's $2,500 to get someone to come in. We did it for $25. That was 100 to 1. $25 just for the few couplings that we needed to buy. You hear what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. It's a ridiculous trade they're making.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they have never thought it out, and they were trained to dissect everything. And then, and if you apply that to your own self, you dissect every aspect of your social body, being, identity, and you protect it all. I mean, it's just an extraordinary trade.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That makes no sense. And
Yeah.
we've all been trained to do that.
To do that. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the only reason it makes sense. I'm just flabbergasted. I did a lot of thinking last time.
Yeah, we've been sort of talked out of the good life, actually,
Did you freeze? I think you're frozen, or I did.
instead of ours.
You just froze up for a good 30 seconds there.
Yeah, and I thought you did too, but I just got a notice that mine is unstable, so it must have been me. Yeah.
I think it was because I didn't get that. And
Okay.
I'm very stable today.
Yeah, I was just commenting on how we've been sold a bill of goods to give up the good life for something that we think is different, and it's really not. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now the question is, I'm glad that in certain, different areas, people are doing very wonderful things. But both of us in our own areas are doing things that are, comparable to the needs of our station in society. And I bet that my sensing is that there is a lot of this going on.
Yeah.
Very little of it makes it to the public view,
What does make it to the public view is our discontent.
Yeah.
And so we blame, the government or the powers that be or whatever for this, which is partly true.
Yeah.
But we don't take responsibility for making the change. We don't feel we have the agency to make the change either. We're so driven by all the things that we feel compelled to do. I'm getting a sort of a microcosm of that in church, where we're about 100 people, but there's about 30 people that really do everything. And before, we were in a church of 400 people, and there was about 150 people that did stuff. Big difference. And we're still trying to act like we are a 400 person church. We're having the same kinds of processes we're trying to bring forth, and we're struggling because there just isn't the resources to do it. So we're going to have a discussion next week about what do we give up? Well, how can we reframe this so that it works for us and we're getting what we need done, but we're not, we've got to shift something so that it's not so much pressure. And so we don't feel so inept, because that's what happens. We're beating ourselves up for not being able to do all the things that we should do, and blaming others who aren't doing anything. And it gets into that kind of stuff instead of just reframing what do we actually have to have happen. So we'll start that discussion next week. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, that's happening in our local HOA. It's happening in broader neighborhoods. Yeah, it really, in some ways, it's easier to just live off the land all by yourself.
At least you're taking care of the things that you absolutely have to have. Yeah.
You know what has to happen, and you immediately can respond to the situations that are most necessary to deal with.
Yeah.
And it really gets messy. So that's why I loved that Andreas Weber, uses that word messy. Life is messy, full of contradictions.
Yeah.
That's the way it works. I mean, I've thought about that a lot, and it seems to me that most of my social upbringing has been to find ways to minimize, that contradiction. I mean, just take health of the body. Don't pick up anything off the floor and eat it. Don't eat dirt. I mean, I do both of those regularly.
Well, yeah, and the fear of germs, when we really actually need to develop immunity, so you need exposure to germs.
Right.
Yeah. The big difference historically, I think that's guns, germs, and steel. That was one of his hypotheses, that those cultures where they lived with their animals were more robust genetically
Yeah,
than those that
that's
didn't.
absolutely the case. I mean,
Yeah.
here I've had cancer twice, and all kinds of markers are, screaming, watch out. Yet I can sleep right next to my wife, who actually had COVID. We were doing tests, and I never got it. And the test said so. So, and my cuts, I cut myself all the time out working outside. The cuts heal in a week, even a big one heals right up. So there's an action. Yeah, I'm sort of caught in a place of how do you justify what's, the different contradictory sides of our society, even. And maybe I shouldn't even do that, but just allow it to be messy. You know what I'm saying? To really stick with that program. That's a revelation for me.
Yeah.
Because, it's bothered me. Okay, but what I'm doing is just fine for me. I guess I should let it stay at that. You know what I'm saying?
I was reading about some of the differences in indigenous societies, and one of them is that they don't think too deeply about stuff.
Yeah.
It's just really not, they don't dig into the whys and what else could be there. They're very much letting it be the way it is, and how interesting that is. And that makes me think about the evolution of the species also, that there's how does that happen? There's all this talk about humanity is on the verge of evolution, we're going to do something. The only way I can understand that is by the integration of those two, because they've been pretty separate. There have been two wholly different ways of living, and so if we integrate them, using our propensity to think about what else could possibly be there, but to do that within the context of life, that maybe that would be the generative scheme for something new, that we would totally rethink our place, our abilities, our agency, our responsibility, and new things would happen that haven't had the potential to happen before.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not anti-technology, but the technology really needs to be life enhancing, and some of it is, but so much of it isn't. And changing that, I saw a documentary on Chaco Canyon, which I'd seen before, but I had a new insight into it, I think, because there's still, I don't know if you know what you know about Chaco Canyon. It's a
I've hiked
place.
through.
Go ahead.
I've hiked through it.
Oh, okay. Well,
Uh,
so you've seen the villages and the buildings and all that.
some
So
of it,
they're,
it's long.
yeah. Oh,
Went
it's huge. I mean,
areas, but
yeah, it's gigantic. I don't know. There's hundreds of villages, but they're all connected geometrically, um, through patterns of sun and earth and sun and moon movements. So different villages are connected through moon passages, and other villages are connected through sun passages. So they were trying to figure out, like, why would they do this? Why would they leave? Because they left very deliberately. They burned the inside of the larger kivas and all of that. So it was very intentful, and it wasn't fast. It wasn't like overnight. It took a lot of preparation to leave too. And I see them as monasteries, actually places where people went to um, develop their spiritualness, their spiritual powers, and that kind of thing. And there was speculation, because of the focus on the sun and the moon and the precision with which they were able to do that, that it was about controlling using those energies and powers to control the weather and that kind of stuff, and that they might have scared themselves about that and decided it was beyond their ken, and they split, which makes sense in my mind, whether it's true or not.
mm-hmm.
But that led me to
That's an interesting take. I've never thought of it in that way, but I completely understand that that is possible.
Yeah, I
And
mean, it's
not
just so,
just with the mind vibrationally, but then that leads to real world steps that you take, and like these men we were talking about earlier that are, beginning to use some real intelligent input into the growing a full, fertile environment for their communities. Yeah, I mean, the two in combination, I think, would be irrepressible.
amazing. Yeah, and exciting for me to really see what that would generate. Um, but it also leads to wondering about, and this is another little thread. I have avoided the Uratia book for 20 years, I guess. And I don't know why, but I have truly avoided it. I have deliberately not investigated it. And on Humanity Rising this week, they had a guy who's spent his whole life with it. I know other people who have been involved with it, but he's really starting to talk about it. And what he opened up for me, because it's a question I've had for a long time. See how to frame this. One of the threads from the Uratia book is that Earth is a dark planet, actually. It's a place where a lot of the more negative thought forms come to be. And so the negatives is that life is really hard here. The positive is that the soul development is very rich and deep, because you have to go through all this stuff. And I've been to the problem of evil, or what we call evil. And how I see that is really not evil so much as the effects of so strongly denying life.
Yeah.
That has all of those consequences, because when you're really separate and you don't care about others and all of that, then you do nasty things. You just don't think about the consequences. You don't experience them yourself because you've cut that off. And so that's kind of what I see, is not, I want to say not deliberate, but I think there is a certain deliberateness about those people who are ticked about that. You know, you get into the, if you've done it to me, I'm going to do it to you, all that kind of stuff that comes out of that. So there, that is a level of deliberateness, but it's not that the person is actually evil. It's those mindsets, those understandings, that separation that make all of those kinds of things possible. Anyway, that's my story about evil and how it is. And the Uratia story really clarified that for me, that because that is what the Uratia story is saying, basically. And that was just really interesting. So then back to Chaco Canyon, thinking about people who had the integrity to say no, and how incredible that was, that they recognized that they were not, and instead of working to change it or any of that, they just quit. But the integrity that took, because the amount of effort, they've been there for several hundred years. I mean, this is not a small project, you know, and they still said, no, this isn't right.
Yeah. Well, that is kind of the whole plot line for the movie Oppenheimer.
That
okay. There came a point where they realized, they had full realization, and it was before Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know, they began to realize exactly what this was going to do. And then especially once the test bomb was exploded. And then after, you know, the two cities were bombed, there was a very deep introspection, you know, among the scientists as to whether this should be continued. And evidently the politicians decided, right. There's gung-ho, we're not letting this out of our hands. Yeah. Stuff. And so it isn't just something that's happening amongst the indigenous populations. You know, this is still working out.
People are still saying no. Yeah,
we do it differently in our, you know, industrial society.
Well, and it's more mixed. Yeah, I don't think we're as unified as that society might have been.
Right, that could well be.
Yeah,
I'm coming more and more to the opinion that, well, I call it an observation, that we really have to start looking at ourselves as one humanity. And, you know, one humanity has a purpose on the planet.
Yeah.
And it's going to vary tremendously, just like, you know, even grasses, you know, vary immensely from place to place, environment to environment. You know, the weather, the soil, and so forth. Well, humans have developed that way, and yet, you know, we have trouble accepting that. And even in the technological world today, people are going different directions. I mean, totally separate from what we would consider to be the land-based, you know, indigenous cultures. But okay, we have the culture we have, sort of the mass culture, but there are vast differences. that's being undermined. You know, you used to be, I mean, it used to be a real pleasure to drive around this country in the 60s or hitchhike even. It was possible. Yeah, you go into a diner in Nebraska and it's a completely different experience from Alabama. That's not true anymore.
Right, right.
Very
right.
rare to find anything like that. And so it's diversity. You know, all of
Yep.
life is earmarked by
Yep.
how diverse it is and why it's doing that. I mean, that's what makes it successful.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
you know, of course, there are overlying problems like why war in the first. I mean, you know, in other words, they're
Well,
the big ones. But I'm talking about even the society that underlies all of this. There are such contradictions as to what we're doing with it and what would be possible. I mean,
yeah.
if we really got into diversity and we really felt an immense, you know, the word love is used, but I'm going to say, and you know, an acceptance and feeling appreciation and dependence on the other types,
Right.
we wouldn't be spending. We'd free up that $1 trillion of war money, and things
Right.
would be very different on
Yeah.
this planet.
Yeah. 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 That's one of the things that these values have really done for me when I really and science, frankly, from the scientific view, to really see how the world is actually made
Yeah.
and to see that diversity and how inherent, I mean, that's all it is. Because it's all these selves doing their own thing, it has to be diverse. And that's just so awesome and so rich and so incredible. It's just, yeah, it just opens up all sorts of doors and appreciations.
Yeah, and I apply that to, say, the house pets. You know, people bemoan the fact, oh, you know, the house pets are, you know, they're not the real thing. No, they are. They're real cats and dogs and parakeets. They're different. They have changed. They have decided that in order to work within the family's familial situation, that they're willing to act a certain way. And that's life in its most beautiful form.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do sometimes think it would be wonderful, fun to see what they're like in their real natural habitat. And I'm not just talking about the stray cats out in the street, because that's almost like homeless people. You
Yeah.
know,
But barn cats do have a culture.
barn cats is a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Barn
And
cats do have a culture.
invited that cat into the house, and man, it would look around, and finally, you know, it would deign to, you would say, yeah, come on up to the couch. It jumped on the couch, but it jumped off pretty quickly.
Yeah.
In a month, we were saying, yep, better than the barn, isn't it?
Yeah, we have a barn cat. That's what my daughter got. And
Yeah,
he so misses his family and the culture. It is just really hard for him.
really.
And yeah, yeah, he really does. Um, yeah. And he's using the dog as a surrogate, but the dog isn't really wild about that. And so the cat isn't really getting the mutuality that he is looking for. And when we had a cat, she did not understand that either. She wasn't raised in that culture. And she was very much being on her own. And he just never got that. And it made him mad. So he would bully her and tease her. And she opted out. She got she got cancer in foot. But it's yeah, so I mean it's a different experience living in community. We're not used to it. And when
Yeah,
you love it, you miss it.
there's a lot of lessons for
Don't
us.
have it, it feels imposing and it's difficult.
I mean, what's a community? What's it become these days? I mean, I I'm worried about it, but then again, do people find their own sense of community, and is that sufficient? In other words, in online communities or Facebook communities,
Yeah.
is that the same, really? I mean, you have
Oh,
to ask without just condemning it. I don't think it is. It wouldn't be for me.
yeah, no, it's not. I mean, I yearn for community, and I don't know that I could live in it either, actually. There's something different about being raised with others. There's kind of a toleration and an acceptance that kind of happens with that, because these are all the people that are around you all the time, and you just kind of meld to it. When you're have not had that raising period and you try and come together, it's much more difficult to pull together, to allow for the differences that you see in others, and to not have the expectations that they would somehow understand when they don't.
Intentional communities are a perfect example of that. And I've lived
Yeah.
in several over
Yeah.
a period of many years.
Yeah.
I won't say that didn't work. I mean, we did amazing things,
Right.
but it was, as community, I would say that they all fell short.
Yeah, I think being raised in it is a totally different experience, and that's what we're missing. I think that's why it's so easy, that's in quotes, in the more tropical, hotter areas where people have lived that way. So when you come in with an agricultural thing or help them with it, that's what they're already doing. They're already kind of used to that. So it just sort of ups the game a little bit. We're here, we're not used to it, and it doesn't up the game, it becomes the game. And it's a real hard adjustment to leave all the other stuff to just do that. So I think there's always that pull to do something else, to not have that be the only thing in your life, where if it is the only thing in your life, it's getting richer, it's getting more diverse and has more options. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that I could, and I've thought about it. There are options, people I've met in some of these communities that are doing that kind of thing. Um, I don't know,
It's an interesting thing. One of the primary, in the last 4 years or so, one of the primary thought targets for me, in a spiritual sense, has been the two great commandments that are listed in the Gospels. And basically, it's love the Lord with all thy mind, heart, and soul. And the second is like unto it, to love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, been meditating on that for long enough now that I see them as exactly the same thing.
Yes.
It's only through interaction as a human body that's come together to accept its, people say, oh, it's, unified, so no, I mean, there's specifics that you have to meet. You come together to accept the diversity, to love the diversity, to really work with the diversity, probably not understand it. You don't have to. So-and-so over there understands what he or she is doing. I don't have to understand it. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
to me, it's until that happens, we're hopeless. We're hopelessly lost in this, sea of helplessness, really.
Yeah.
And that
Dissatisfaction, because that's kind of what comes up. It's like eating fast food, when you're hungry, you're full, but you're not satisfied. And there's always this, I don't know, there's something else you need. You don't know what it is. And you're kind of always searching for something else that would fill that gap that's not filled because it's not really what it should be. Yeah.
Well, so this is one of the reasons I love meeting in this, what we're doing here, what I call it, the deep dive. I mean, it's because we can play with these ideas.
Yeah.
We can be ourselves.
Yeah.
And there are others that you go to, there are others that I go to. And I'm finding that there are all these different mechanisms by which to get to know some vastly different people. In many cases. One group is a group in Korea, South Korea.
Wow.
Most of whom don't speak English very well.
Huh.
So use
How did you get involved in that group?
Well, a friend of mine, this was in this spiritual tradition that we're involved in, the emissaries. He was South Korean. Well, or he was born in Canada, but he was South Korean heritage, and he went back to South Korea and gathered together a group.
Yeah.
None of the rest of us were doing that particularly, but he was moved to do that. And he pulled together this amazing, and they're young people.
Wow.
They're 20s. Not all, there's some old ones like me too, but it's quite gratifying to hear the similarities,
yeah.
well as the differences.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm just devoting everything I am to exploring this territory of what it would be like to work as a one unified human process. What does that mean to me? And what I always assumed were the boundaries of my skin and mind. And deep dives, by the way, dialogue is a perfect expression of how that works. What you say is very different from what I say, or what Ani says. She adds a whole new aspect. Right. I think we're more similar than she is, because she brings in this fiery thing.
Yeah.
Questions everything, which is lovely.
Yeah.
Where is she today? Anyway, she
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I'm surprised she's not here. I'll have to call her afterwards.
That's my first thought. I hope she's fine.
Yeah.
But
well, and dialogue is the mechanism to make it happen. I'm seeing that so much in the church. We spent a day and a half under great protest thinking more deeply about how we do stuff. And we had a guide who asked questions and a tool to use and that kind of stuff. But we don't have time to talk about these things. We're not taking the time. When we have meetings, we're trying to do work. We're not really exploring, should we do the work? Or should we do the work this way? And and
what I'm finding, if that spam risk, what I'm finding is if that work is well done, the work of integration,
should we do it and how we do it? Yeah.
Then when you actually sit down to do something, it's like, oh, half an hour, you're done. It's just
really easy. Yeah. But getting people to get that, Yeah. But getting people to get that. And I'm going to try and do that in this next board meeting. We've got this long agenda. I don't expect we're going to get very far, and I don't care. But we really do need to rethink things. And I'm hoping, and two people aren't going to be there. It's just frustrating to match schedules and all of that. Yeah. It's just, but we need to take the time to explore. And I feel, because we're playing with dynamic governance or sociocracy, that the circle method is all about relationships, and you don't have relationships without talking. So they have this consent thing, and they have this round thing that you do, so everybody has a say. But saying something is not discussing.
Right.
It's not the same thing at all. And we don't have that free ranging, just exploration time that is really so needed, so that we're all deeply centered in what we're doing and have those understandings that allow us, that are shared deep enough that we can trust each other to act in that way. And
That's,
I don't know what to
that
do about
trust
it.
is very important, because
Yeah.
really what works here is that there's no leader.
Yeah. Well, and there's another group. I am fighting the need for a leader. They just don't get it. And they hired somebody who is supposed to be in a support position, who is going, well, I don't have any power. I don't like that. I'm going to change the law so I have power. And he's really come up with an ordinance to
Oh,
put
well,
him in power. And it's like, no, you can't do that.
I
And
mean, why? Then that nullifies everyone else's sense of
yeah, but then
responsibility.
he can force them to do things. So he has said, oh, then you will do these things. And if you don't do these things, we'll take away all this. And I'm going, no, no,
Pass backwards, as we used to say.
very, very. But so many people don't understand it. They're so used to it. So I'm in meetings with people who are going, well, I kind of think maybe it should be another way, but if you're going to do this, then we should do that. And it's like, no, 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 you don't give them that license. You never say if you're going to do this. That's because you're not going to do that. We won't allow it, but they're not there. They're not there. So I don't know what's going to happen. It's been a really great experiment for 20 some odd years. But with everybody new on both sides now, nobody really understands the point, and they're not interested in the point. They want to do stuff, and the only way they understand to get stuff done is the old way, even though it has all the problems that it has. And a new thing just seems like additional work. So I don't know. We'll see. But I've been there raising the flag.
Good for you.
Uh, yes. And I've been doing it kindly. I haven't been nasty.
Well,
But
you have the patience of Job. I mean, but I mean, this is a lifetime work, and
yeah, it is.
if this were to succeed, it'll take more lifetimes. It's going to go on well beyond my death. But to plant the seeds right now, I think, is just really critical, and they're being planted. From what I see, there's a lot happening.
You just really gave me a focus I haven't really seen before. This really is about learning to live with leaderlessness.
Yeah.
I mean, you think of the planet, there's no leader, there's nobody in charge of any of that, and yet it works. I mean, that's for me why these are so important, because these values are the processes that you use to make that happen. It keeps putting you back into the whole every time you look at this. Dynamic stability, that there's a range of things. So you stop having that line, those finite precision points, and allow for that flow, and realize that it's going to flow over time, and that's okay. So you don't resist that process. That puts you into the process again. So that's what these do, is they put you back into all of that. So you don't need somebody telling you what to do. You just need to keep reflecting on these, and you'll fit, because that's how the fit happens. That's I really appreciate that. I
would add
not.
one more thing. I mean, there is a point of focus.
Yes, life.
Or someone who represents that. I mean, usually it's a person who represents that, but represents it without directing.
And without being there are means to the focus, not the purpose themselves.
They're representing the means, correct?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that person would be like like you have just suggested, that person in your sense would be one who makes sure that you don't, stray from the process.
Right.
If the process is set, someone makes sure that that's followed. But
Yeah.
other than that, is there's no one person making all the decisions.
Right. Right. Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking in terms of regenerative leadership, because I've been really trying to explore that. The latest podcast, and this was the first time I used the same video in the podcast as I did in my Facebook post, because it was shorter than usual. But it's really trying to define that. And I said in that there are kind of like two main things that we're having to deal with. One is how to do what's right, and how to facilitate the planet. Those are the two areas, and they coalesce. I mean, you want to do what's right to facilitate the planet. So that changes the conversation about right and wrong. And it gets out of the punitive and all that, because it's not about that. It's about what works for the planet, and what works to keep life on the planet is what's right.
Yeah, and there's no great ideas.
Well, you can't decide what that is.
Ideas that are separate from the flow of what's happening.
Yeah.
They just, I mean, there can be great ideas in the sense of what I just earlier said, of an insight into where you're going with this. But specific ideas, I mean, what's good for one moment,
Right.
one day later, it just isn't, or even 10 minutes later, it's no longer applicable in the same way. And I think people really, it took me a long time to understand that. I think most people really don't.
Yeah. Well, and that's how you step out of the system, because you want to stop it. You want to control it. And the system is just flow. That's all it is. And without that flow, it doesn't function, because it has to allow for the adaptation of every individual thing making a new choice.
Which they will do if they're feeling as if
they're alive.
They're alive to their agency. I mean, that's why the comment that our society is preoccupied with death.
Yeah.
And it's not that the people are dead, they're still living, but they're preoccupied with things that are even ideas that are dead, that are long past their living point.
Yeah. Well, and they're trying to stop stuff so much instead of facilitate it.
There's that too.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got our walking paper set up. Let's see what we can do. I've got to write a request to the HOA to spend money.
Uh-huh.
I have to have a vote.
Right.
I've got to write that right now.
I have to write a minister's evaluation.
Yeah, but it comes to you. Okay, where we are right now. Okay, I know how to write that.
Yeah. Oh, it's a delight, Robert, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, see you next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.